Long before cities, civilizations, or even the concept of settled life, early humans roamed the untamed wilderness, struggling for survival against nature's relentless dangers. The world was not yet shaped to their advantage. It belonged to creatures far stronger, faster, and deadlier than them. Towering forests, vast grasslands, and treacherous rocky terrains were their home, but they were also the hunting grounds of creatures that could end their fragile existence in an instant. Saber-toothed tigers prowled in the shadows, their dagger-like teeth capable of piercing flesh with ease. Packs of wolves, larger and more aggressive than their modern descendants, lurked in the darkness, waiting for a moment of weakness. Giant bears, massive and unyielding, dominated entire territories, claiming anything they deemed as theirs. Crocodiles, unchanged by time, lay hidden beneath the murky waters, ready to strike at any living being that dared approach. Even the air was filled with threats. Massive birds of prey circled high above, their keen eyes spotting the slightest movement below. For early humans, every single day was a battle. Unlike the great predators, they lacked sharp claws, thick hides, or powerful fangs. Their bodies were frail, their speed was inferior, and their senses were weaker. They could not afford a single mistake, for one misstep could mean death. Yet, despite these overwhelming odds, they survived. Their survival was not a matter of brute strength, but of adaptation and intelligence. They did not fight the beasts on their terms. They changed the rules of the hunt. They studied their predators, learning their movements, their weaknesses, and their habits. Through observation, they discovered patterns. When predators hunted, where they rested, and how they reacted to different situations. This knowledge would become the foundation of their survival, allowing them to carve out a fragile existence in a world that sought to erase them. But intelligence alone was not enough. To endure, early humans needed more than just knowledge. They needed strategies, tools, and, most importantly, each other. Of all the discoveries that shaped human survival, fire was the most revolutionary. It was not just a tool. It was a weapon, a shield, and a beacon of hope in the darkness. Before fire, early humans were bound by the rhythm of the sun, retreating into hiding once the sky turned black. Night belonged to the predators, and any movement in the dark could mean a swift and brutal end. But fire changed everything. At first, fire was a mystery, a force of destruction that appeared in the aftermath of a lightning strike or volcanic eruption. Early humans feared it, just as the beasts did. But unlike the animals, they learned. They experimented with flames, cautiously observing how it reacted to wood, how it could be fed and sustained. Over time, they harnessed its power, carrying burning embers from natural fires, and later learning to create their own through friction and stone. With fire, they gained control over their surroundings. It provided warmth in the freezing nights, allowing them to expand into colder regions where predators were less common. It cooked their food, making it easier to digest and freeing up energy that would otherwise be spent on processing raw meat. But most importantly, it became a deterrent against the monstrous creatures that had once ruled the night. Predators feared fire. The flickering flames, the crackling sounds, the unbearable heat, it was something they could not comprehend or fight against. Early humans learned to use this fear to their advantage, keeping constant fires burning around their settlements. This simple act created a barrier between them and the night stalkers, giving them precious hours of rest without the looming threat of being dragged away in the darkness. But fire was not just a passive defense. It was an active weapon. Early humans discovered that torches could drive away even the fiercest of beasts. They realized that setting dry grass ablaze could force predators away from hunting grounds or flush out hidden threats. Some even wielded fire-coated spears, turning their fragile wooden weapons into instruments of terror against creatures that once saw them as mere prey. Through fire, They carved a place for themselves in a world where they did not belong. Yet, survival was never guaranteed, for fire alone could not defeat every threat that lurked in the wild. While fire offered protection, it was not enough to sustain life. Food was a constant necessity, and in a world ruled by predators, it was often scarce. Unlike modern times, where food could be cultivated or stored, early humans relied entirely on the land's generosity. They scavenged, foraged, and hunted, but every meal came with the risk of becoming one. Predators had strength, but early humans had tactics. They did not engage in direct combat with beasts that could tear them apart. Instead, they relied on patience, coordination, and their growing arsenal of tools. At first, they were scavengers, following larger predators and waiting for them to leave behind scraps of their kills. But scavenging was dangerous. Other carnivores also sought these remains, leading to frequent deadly confrontations. To overcome this, early humans adapted their methods. They started working together in larger groups, intimidating smaller predators by their sheer numbers. They developed distraction tactics, using noise and fire to drive away competitors from abandoned kills. As their confidence grew, they transitioned from scavengers to hunters. But they did not chase their prey as other predators did. Instead, they wore them down. Early humans mastered endurance hunting, a method where they relentlessly pursued an animal over long distances, forcing it into exhaustion. Unlike most predators, who relied on short bursts of speed, humans had exceptional stamina and could track their prey for hours or even days. They learned to set traps, using sharpened sticks and concealed pits to wound or capture animals. They crafted spears with stone tips, extending their reach and minimizing the risk of close combat. Over time, they refined their techniques, developing projectile weapons like the atlatl to hunt from a safe distance. But hunting was not just about killing, it was about understanding. Early humans studied their prey as carefully as they did their predators. They learned migration patterns, water sources, and weak points in an animal's anatomy. They passed down knowledge through generations, ensuring that each new group was better prepared than the last. This mastery of the hunt allowed them to thrive, securing a steady food supply that sustained their expanding communities. Yet, even with food and fire, they still faced threats that no single human could withstand alone. In the wild, solitude was a death sentence. Unlike the great predators who could survive on their own, early humans depended on one another for protection, sustenance, and survival. It was not the strongest individual that thrived, it was the strongest group. At first, their gatherings were small, consisting of only a handful of individuals. But as time passed, they learned that larger numbers meant greater security. A lone human stood no chance against a hungry saber-toothed tiger, but a group with spears and torches could drive it away. A single set of eyes could miss an approaching threat, but many could spot danger long before it struck. They developed roles within their groups. Some scouted for food, others maintained fires, while the strongest protected the vulnerable. They communicated through gestures, sounds, and later, primitive language, coordinating their efforts with increasing efficiency. With numbers came innovation. They built temporary shelters, using wood, stone, and animal hides to create defenses against the elements. They fortified their camps with barriers, deterring nocturnal invaders. They formed watch shifts, ensuring that no threat could approach unnoticed. This unity allowed them to stand against dangers that would have otherwise wiped them out. It was not their physical strength that made them dominant. It was their ability to work together, to share knowledge, and to improve upon the lessons of those who came before them. Yet, even with all their strategies, weapons, and alliances, the world remained unforgiving. Survival was never guaranteed, and every day was a test against the merciless forces of nature. But as long as they adapted, as long as they learned, early humans would continue to carve their place in the brutal, untamed world. Survival was not only about fighting predators, it was about enduring the unpredictable forces of nature. Unlike the great beasts that had thick fur or the ability to hibernate, early humans were vulnerable to the changing seasons. The land was not always generous, and harsh winters, relentless droughts, and violent storms tested their resilience in ways that no predator could. The cold was one of their greatest enemies. As temperatures dropped, food became scarce, and exposure to the elements could be just as deadly as a saber-toothed tiger's claws. But early humans adapted. They learned to insulate themselves with animal hides, using the fur of the creatures they hunted to create primitive clothing. They discovered the value of shelter, carving deeper into caves and using rock formations to shield themselves from freezing winds. Fire, once only a tool for protection, became essential for warmth and survival. During winters, they learned to preserve food. Meat, once consumed immediately, was now smoked and dried over fire, allowing it to last for weeks or even months. They stored nuts, berries, and roots in hidden caches, ensuring that even when hunting was impossible, they would not starve. Droughts posed a different kind of challenge. Without water, survival became nearly impossible. Rivers dried up, plants withered, and prey migrated to distant lands. But early humans observed the land and found solutions. They learned where to find hidden water sources deep within caves, beneath certain rock formations, or in the roots of specific plants. Some groups even followed the herds, traveling long distances to remain near fresh water. Storms and natural disasters also threatened their existence. Heavy rains could flood their shelters, while violent winds could tear apart their primitive dwellings. But each disaster taught them something new. They reinforced their camps, choosing locations that were less prone to flooding. They identified signs of approaching storms, darkening skies, shifting winds, changes in animal behavior, and prepared in advance. Through trial and error, they became not just survivors, but masters of adaptation. Their ability to read the land, predict its changes, and respond with innovation ensured that, no matter how harsh the world became, they would endure. Fire had given them protection, and strategy had given them the ability to hunt. But as early humans encountered new threats, they needed better weapons to defend themselves. The first tools were simple sharpened sticks and heavy stones used for crushing bones. But necessity drove innovation, and over time, these crude implements evolved into specialized weapons. Spears became their first true weapon of war. Unlike clubs or stones, a spear allowed them to strike from a distance, keeping them out of reach of a predator's claws or fangs. At first, these were simple wooden shafts, but eventually they became more advanced. The tips were hardened with fire, then later crafted from sharpened stone, making them deadlier with each generation. As hunting techniques evolved, so did their weaponry. The atlatl, an early spear-throwing device, allowed them to launch projectiles with greater force and accuracy. Traps became more sophisticated, using pits, weighted logs, and sharpened spikes to capture or kill prey without direct confrontation. The bow and arrow, though still in its early forms, would later revolutionize their ability to hunt from a safe distance. But weapons were not just for hunting, they were for defense. Early humans had to contend with rival groups, other creatures that sought the same resources, and even threats from within their own kind. Warfare, in its most primitive form, was born. They formed strategies to ambush threats, used terrain to their advantage, and created defensive formations that ensured no single person was left vulnerable. The creation of weapons marked a turning point in their evolution. They were no longer just prey struggling to survive. They had become hunters, warriors, and ultimately, the dominant force in their world. Strength and weapons alone were not enough. Strategy was what set early humans apart from the beasts. The ability to think ahead, to anticipate danger before it arrived, and to plan for survival ensured their place at the top of the food chain. One of their greatest strategic advantages was teamwork. They did not hunt alone. They coordinated, using signals, formations, and distraction tactics. When facing a dangerous beast, some would lure it into an ambush, while others struck from the sides. They understood the value of positioning, using high ground, narrow paths, or even natural obstacles to control the battlefield. Stealth was another crucial skill. Rather than charge headfirst into danger, they moved silently through the forests, tracking their prey without being detected. They observed animals closely, mimicking their movements and even disguising their scent to blend into the environment. Some covered themselves in mud or animal hides to mask their presence, allowing them to get close without triggering alarm. They also developed early forms of communication. At first, it was simple grunts, gestures, and signals. But as time passed, these methods became more complex, allowing them to coordinate over greater distances. Simple warning calls evolved into an early form of language, enabling them to share knowledge, teach survival techniques, and pass down crucial information from one generation to the next. Through strategy, they overcame threats that should have been insurmountable. A lone human was weak, but a group that could think, plan, and adapt was unstoppable. As generations passed, survival was no longer just about brute force or instinct, it was about wisdom. Those who lived long enough to learn from their experiences became the first teachers, guiding their people toward better ways of living. Elders were the keepers of knowledge. They remembered the best hunting grounds, the safest shelters, and the signs of approaching danger. They knew which plants could heal wounds and which ones could kill. They understood the cycles of nature, the migration of animals, and the hidden rules of the land. In a world where one mistake could mean death, this knowledge was invaluable. Younger hunters learned from the stories of their elders, avoiding the dangers that had claimed so many before them. The wisdom of past generations became the foundation upon which future generations built their survival. But the role of elders was not just about knowledge, it was about unity. They settled disputes, maintained traditions, and ensured that their people remained strong. Without them, chaos could spread, and the delicate balance of their communities could be lost. Through the elders, early humans gained something no other creature had: continuity. They were no longer just surviving day by day. They were building a legacy, passing down the secrets of survival that would shape the future of their kind. The mastery of fire was one of humanity's greatest achievements, but its significance went beyond warmth and protection. Fire allowed early humans to expand their reach, venture into colder territories, and transform the very way they lived. It was not just a tool, it was a symbol of control over the natural world. With fire, they could cook food, making it easier to digest and unlocking nutrients that raw meat and plants could not provide. Cooked food meant stronger bodies, healthier children, and longer lifespans. It also reduced the risk of disease, as parasites and bacteria were killed in the flames. Over time, humans began experimenting, combining different ingredients and developing the first primitive forms of cooking. Fire also changed the way they built their shelters. Instead of merely seeking refuge in caves, they began constructing more sophisticated dwellings. They used wood, stone, and even animal hides to create protective enclosures. They dug pits in the ground to escape the wind, stacked stones for reinforcement, and learned to seal openings with branches and mud to retain heat. As their shelters improved, so did their sense of community. Fire became the heart of the tribe, a gathering place where they shared food, warmth, and stories. It strengthened social bonds, fostering cooperation and trust. Beyond its practical uses, fire had a psychological impact. It provided comfort in the darkness, a beacon of safety in a world filled with unseen dangers. It gave them confidence, allowing them to explore further, hunt larger prey, and establish permanent settlements with fire and shelter. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving. Survival had once been a constant struggle, but with each discovery, each adaptation, and each lesson learned, early humans became more than just another species in the wild. They were shaping their world, bending nature to their will, and building the foundation of civilization. With the fear of immediate survival reduced, they could now think beyond the present moment. They began crafting tools not just for necessity, but for efficiency. They developed new hunting techniques, cultivated plants, and domesticated animals. Language evolved beyond simple gestures and sounds. With words, they could teach, plan, and express complex ideas. Knowledge no longer died with an individual. It was passed down, refined, and expanded upon. The earliest forms of culture emerged. They painted on cave walls, recording their hunts and their stories. They carved symbols into stone, marking the first steps toward written communication. Rituals and traditions formed, strengthening their bonds and creating a sense of identity. The predators that once hunted them had become their prey. The forces of nature that once threatened them were now harnessed to their advantage. No longer were they at the mercy of the wild, they had become its masters. This was not just survival. This was the beginning of something greater. This was the dawn of humanity.